definitely we thought we'd talk about modernisation of developing countries. I don't really know if we can call India a developing country anymore. I think in some senses we can, and in other senses not so much, because, I mean, economically it's doing very well.
Yeah, I mean, well, I suppose every country's developing in some way, shape or form, right?
That's very true.
I think in the sense of the word that's usually used, yeah, you're right, India is... But then again, it's not really seen as a first world country, quote unquote, first world country. It's
Oh, we touch on this so often, don't we? That the perspective of all of this language is always the Western position, and so you stand in the West and look at the world, and your assumption is that the West is developed and modern, and everything else is either developing or in need of modernization. So that perspective is that we all always adopt. But I don't think that's valid at all. I think modern really needs to be defined. How would you define modern?
I think something with, lots of investment, forward thinking, economic growth, acceptance of other people and other cultures as well, which I think is important. So something that's not inclusive. It's kind of forward-thinking in its technology, everything, really.
Keeping in touch with the times.
Yeah.
So new developments being absorbed and used, just something evolving.
Yeah, and both of you have talked about sort of attributes, haven't you? Whereas modern is an indication of time. Sort of in the old ages, that was ancient, and what's happening today is modern.
Yeah.
But so like progressing with the times.
Yeah, I think progress is the key word, isn't it? I would say for me, modern associates with progress.
Yeah.
And in a good way. Change.
Do you really think so? Progress? Modern? I mean, if we look at modern society, okay, I'm sure there's a lot of benefits, but...
there's loads of benefits of modern society.
It's not all great, is it, really?
Okay. I think it is. What do you not like about it?
Lots of people are stressed out. We have all these jobs, a lot of pollution. The world's going to pot. The economies are all crashing. Wars everywhere. It's
And I was joined on the flight last night by some poor girl who had the pleasure of my company in an aircraft for 7 hours. And we were talking about one aspect of this. We were talking about she was doing research in developing countries. Okay. And this idea of modern being good was something like you just touched on, Vivek, which I thought didn't really stand up to as much scrutiny as people assume it does. Modern equates with... let's have a look. We have more doctors than ever before, and yet more people seem to be unhealthy than ever before. We have more psychiatrists, and yet depression and mental illness is skyrocketing. We have more economists than ever before, and yet the world is in a financial crisis. And these are all modern, and yet on the other hand there is modern negative aspects as well. So that should give our listeners a little bit of a flavour of what we're going to be working with today. Modernisation in developing countries. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What do you understand when we talk about modernisation? And so feel free to text in, call us. You can text in on 07961 387787, or indeed phone in and join in the conversation. 0208 472 9292, and let's keep it reasonable.
We've just had a text in from Ramesh. She said, a country is truly developed if they have eradicated poverty. I think that's a very nice notion.
Have we eradicated poverty in this country?
I think more so than other countries, yes.
Oh dear. There are studies which show that the divide between the rich and the poor has never been as great as it is at this moment in time.
But compared to other countries which have 70% of their population living in poverty, I think if we're making a comparison to developing countries, our country is doing quite well.
Okay. Yeah.
I think if we're talking about percentages, I think that's a valid point.
Exactly, and there aren't people, dying of famine and starvation, malnutrition, as there are in other countries.
No, we outsourced all of that to the third world.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Well, that's a very controversial statement you just made there. Can you back it up with reason?
Not sure that was reasonable,
Exactly.
I thoroughly enjoyed sharing that on the airwaves, though. No, I quite agree. In this country, we're not nearly as unwell off as in many nations. So that's true.
And that's why there is such a huge influx of people coming to the UK, because they realise, the prosperity of living here as well.
Yeah, eradication of poverty, I think, is a really great benchmark for whether a country is developed or not.
I think it's a small side point, though, but I think how a country presents itself through media is really important as well. Globally, people still have this perception that England's, wow, London's, streets are paved with gold and it's a land of opportunity, and
that is such an important point.
But I'm not sure if the media always gives an accurate picture. I mean, maybe that's why we don't think poverty is such a big problem here, because we don't see it. perhaps.
Possibly, but I know there's benefit streets. There's all these different programs that are trying to show that actually, things do exist in our society. It's not all hunky dory.
Yeah,
no,
So
very
I'm not
much
quite
so.
sure. And at least in this country, we have freedom of media. There's countries where everything is. I mean, North Korea, for example, everything's so strict and tailored that even if there is so much poverty and famine, it's never going to be shown to the outside world.
yeah. No.
I think there is a point of view which says that the West always hides its own foibles and presents everybody else's and broadcasts them around the world. So there's definitely a need for how you present your country and its achievements to really be highlighted. Yeah, definitely. I'll go along with that one. So we've had eradication of poverty, and that was from Rameshji. Thank you very much for that, Rameshji.
Yeah.
That was a great
We've got
contribution.
another text in from Amrit. When a country becomes developed, they lose a community spirit, which is an interesting point. I mean, it could happen.
I think there's an element of truth to that, and I think whenever I've spoken to the elder generation, the generation which is a lot older than me, the generations which are a lot older than me, there's usually this view that grandparents are usually seen as having everything's modernizing way too fast. Back in the day, it used to be great. Our culture was this, and our culture was that, and now you people with your Facebook and your apps, and, your
You don't know what
smartphones.
life is really about.
No, it's true. We're getting more kind of disconnected from each other by being online all the time and on our phones.
I think this
Definitely.
community spirit aspect is really important, because often modernization is something else is termed modernization. It's almost like universalization or globalization. The loss of cultural identity, the loss of old bonds that held people and their communities together. That often fragments with the rush to modernize. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for developing countries, isn't it? To modernize, i.e. eradicate poverty, improve education, improve health, do all of those things that we associate with modernization, but without loss of identity,
No,
without loss of
definitely.
cultural tradition, without loss of those things that make a nation what it is and make it different from every other nation.
But that must be really hard to do. I mean, just having come back from India, you go in the most modernized places are those that have got McDonald's and Subways.
No,
and,
definitely.
it's a very Western model of modernization, which everyone is trying to ape to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, you all know my views on McDonald's. I don't want to air that. But even in India, it's sort of it's great to get a McDonald's wedgie burger, because they've taken the McDonald's modern version and made it really Indianized, and that's an absolute,
I suppose that's true as well.
absolute delight. So it works both ways, I guess.
Definitely.
Thanks for that, Amit. That is absolutely spot on as well. I think modernization without loss of identity has to be the goal, doesn't it?
Definitely. I mean, because there is a perception, I mean, using India as an example, that if you're modernized, you're kind of better than everyone else, and people, they lose their roots sometimes. I mean, I've got cousins and relatives in India who they kind of, if you're religious or you believe in your religion or follow it, they just can't understand it. But they're like, you're from the UK, you guys are really modern. How come you still, believe in all these rituals and
Yeah, what's wrong with
beliefs?
you? Why aren't you on a PS3?
Yeah, because I mean, there's a perception that if you're really modern, you actually lose all your kind of community roots.
Oh,
and
it's
actually,
true.
I think in England, we can be modern but still hold on to our community too. And maybe it's because we're away from India, it makes us more stronger, because
Maybe maybe there is something absolutely fantastic in that, right? Because the generations who came from India, they brought Indian traditions and habits which go back 40, 50 years, and they came into what's termed a modern environment.
Yeah.
And so they've kept many of those traditions as best as they can, but also have got the modern surrounding and the modern way of doing things, and those two have merged together quite well for us, haven't they? Whereas over in India, as you said, often they have lost a lot of those traditions which we've had preserved over here, and they've been replaced by
Going to McDonald's.
going to McDonald's.
Other
and,
fast food brands are available.
Yeah, and wearing
in India now as well.
and wearing T-shirts with things like "Don't hassle the Hoff."
I haven't seen that one there
Haven't
before.
you?
Is this
Oh,
a
God,
new
it's,
trend?
It's all over New Delhi at the moment.
You'll see it
right.
next week.
You'll see it next week.
Okay.
No, that is so true.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I wrote about this as well, but India did want to open up a Playboy club, which faced lots of opposition. But they thought, it was modern. It's a modern thing to do. They're like a developed nation now. Why not open a Playboy club? I think sometimes with different cultural sensitivities,
Yeah, I thought
you have to take that into consideration
I think
as well.
so. And we've mentioned India a few times, but I think India's learning to value its own traditions more so than it has in the past now. There was such a lot of pressure from outside of India that it needs to modernize,
Yeah.
and that really meant lose your identity. And I think it's now beginning to say, well, actually, no, this is something we value, and it's about us, and we don't need to do it in the way that everybody else has done it, and that doesn't prevent us from being modern.
So when you both were there, did you see this kind of, identity still there within India? I mean, you were there whilst it was Shivratri. Was there big celebrations? Are people still really in touch with their religious side?
Yeah, I found that so.
I think there's a mix, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, Satish, that there were some people who went out and partied on Shivratri, to celebrate Shivratri.
Let's have a Shivratri party.
Well, it happens here on Christmas Eve as well. I mean,
Yeah.
all the clubs are full. It's a huge thing.
Yeah, there is that aspect. But there again, there's a very vibrant spiritual and cultural experience that goes around Shivratri, where the people who we were with, they were fasting throughout the day, those who do these things, and many of them were planning to be chanting and meditating all night long, and that's very much part of an old tradition, but in a very new setting. And one of the other things, you just talked about modernization. I've had an example. We were there's a Punjabi tradition where they do this thing called jago, and they all wander around and wake everyone
Especially for weddings. It's a huge thing.
So it's a cracking thing, where they put a little earthenware pot on the head with little flames and lights above it, and then they go knocking on door to door, waking everyone up and saying, come and join in the fun. And that was really good. We did all of that, but with a modern twist, because now the lights are no longer flames.
Oh, health and safety.
Health and safety.
It's coming to India too.
They're little LED flames now. So that's modernisation, but having kept the cultural part of it still there.
Definitely. We've had a text in from Sunil. He said, a developed country automatically raises the standard of living. So with becoming developed, there's lots of kind of economic benefits, which then filters down to standard of living. And I think it's true. I mean, using India as an example again, when I went there, compared to when I went there, 10 years ago, you can see the streets are cleaner, people are taking more care in what goes on, and it's more hygienic.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier, Prerna, developed countries, there's less poverty. And so it's part of the definition of developed, I think, that the standard of living is better overall, generally. So I definitely think that's a good point.
And what Sunil says about developed, I think that should be a consequence of modernisation. That you modernise, but with the intention of feeding all of your population. You modernise with the intention of making sure education is available to everyone. And it doesn't have to be Western education, it doesn't have to be a Western diet. But so long as everybody is fed and health is increasing and education is enabling them to participate in society, achieve their ambitions, then that's the key. Not so much carbon copying the modern template from...
And we can see this, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, with the kind of discovery of oil and the mass wealth in that country. They ensure that all their population are looked after, everyone's well fed, everyone's got an education, houses and jobs. So that's one kind of aspect where economic growth and modernisation has actually really helped them and their people.
I think there's a value side of this as well. I mean, you've raised the Arab countries, some of the Arab nations who are very developed in some ways.
Yeah.
But in other ways, people often think or are reluctant to call them modernised because of the value set.
Yeah. I mean, that's them just trying to hold on to their culture whilst, developing.
I mean, and that's the difficulty, isn't it, really? What's a developed, set of values? Is it the Western set of values, or is it, do we all completely liberalise, much like the West has done, or is the Eastern conservatism that's seen, in developing countries sometimes quite good to hold on to as well? Can you be developed while still retaining that?
Well, I think this is the conundrum, isn't it? Because modern seems to imply that you abandon some of the old values because you replace them with better understanding and perhaps allowed evolution to occur even in the cultural sphere. But in some countries they have modernized with infrastructure and yet completely used all of the new revenue that's come in to sustain, to maintain and to expand upon their ancient traditions.
I mean, Saudi Arabia is an example of that as well, Iran.
Yeah, most of the Middle Eastern countries have got a lot more technically savvy, but have adhered to their core values. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, as long as the people are being evolving as well with happiness and health.
Definitely. I think it's always based on perception. I mean, they perceived their culture and religious heritage to be something that they want to preserve, whereas sometimes in other countries they think, well, actually we want to copy the West is a great place, let's become more like them. So I think it just depends on that nation and the people.
Yeah, and we've just come back from New Delhi, as you mentioned, and the infrastructure there has just catapulted forward. Communications, you can cross from one side of New Delhi right the way through to the other side in an hour, whereas only in a few years ago it would take you days to get across. It was such a snarl. And the impact of that has really meant that people are now doing more, the business activity has improved, and revenue has expanded. So that side of modernising is great. But there is a sense that some aspect of cultural values do get lost in that process. The baby in the bathwater scenario.
Yeah.
We've actually got a text message related to that. Manish has texted in saying people are quite backward here, whilst in India there are people that are so modern that they think even a roti should be eaten with a knife and fork.
Yes, I've been to that restaurant. It was great fun. No, you're absolutely right, Manish. We have been to some of those restaurants only in the last few days, and I always love the fact that you can get 0B water, right? So that's modern, completely clean, purified water using the latest technologies, but then they make pani puri and golgappe from that same water. So that's a good mix of modernization and keeping your cultural heritage, I believe.
Yeah, I think the mix is the key thing. I mean, the point I was just going to make was maybe it's useful to have the old values, and maybe the old values are what's necessary to help guide us through the quickly modernizing world, because everything's speeding up so fast, right? And if you don't have any sort of framework, through which you can navigate or help yourself navigate through all these things which are happening so fast now, you can very easily get lost and lose yourself.
Yeah, I think benchmarks is really key. What do you have as your list of what do they call them in business these days? Key performance indicators or something?
Yeah, that's the one.
Everyone touts GDP, that you've got to have loads of GDP, that your growth has got to be growing. I came across a little report about I think it was Thailand, where in Thailand they don't measure gross domestic product as being such an important indicator, but they really measure gross happiness product.
Oh yeah,
I think come across that one. Is that the one?
Was it? I think it was Bhutan actually.
Was it Bhutan?
Is it the happiest country in the world?
That's right. Yeah, and so they're measuring their modernization journey according to the quotient of happiness. So who's the happiest in the world? It'd be Bhutanese, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think happiness is a great indicator of
and GDP is one that everybody prefers, and that's been thrust upon the developing world, hasn't it?
By the West.
Yeah. But I think that really does need looking at. GDP is about consumption, and consuming in ever increasing numbers doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get happier and happier.
No, and there's always a limit, isn't there? Right? You can't just keep doing that forever.
But then if we talk about GDP, there's also the whole, multiplier effect, that if economy is booming and growing, that's going to trickle down throughout the economy and help the people.
Oh yes, that old chestnut.
We saw that in action in India.
Did you?
No.
Trickle down effect.
Yeah, I guess, there are countries where the poor are very poor and the rich are very rich, so it's difficult to ascertain what's going on there.
Yeah, that trickle down thing has really been I think it's run out of steam now, that as an idea. How much money was given to the banks in this country, and yet they sat on it for years and years and didn't lend anything. Same with the Bank of America. Bank of America apparently is sitting on over $1 trillion cash sitting in its vaults.
Isn't that to control inflation?
No, preventing trickle down. You trickle down, let the money trickle down. Let the guys at the sharp end start to get some of this.
Trickle down.
Right, well, on that note, I think it's time for an advert break. Do keep your texts coming in on 07961 387 787, or you can call us on 0208 472 9090.
Feel free to text in. We've had some quite interesting ideas discussed already, and we're going to go on some more interesting ideas. But if you've got a view and opinion on whether you think modernisation is good, bad, or anything you want to say, feel free to text in on 07961 387 787, or join the conversation by calling in on 0208 472 9292.
And I think we've got a caller who wants to speak to us, Jay from Chislehurst and Bromley. Hi Jay, how are you?
Hi Jay,
hello
welcome.
there. It's a very interesting conversation you've had.
Oh, glad you're enjoying it.
Yes, the point that I want to make is that Nehru represented modernity, but the Mahatma represented tradition.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Thank you for that, Jay. Expand on that.
Yes, the Mahatma wanted India to maintain its historical tradition by being an agricultural country, but Nehru, being trained as a politician in the West, he saw that India has got to compete, which is one of the key ideologies of the West. India has got to compete with the West and has to do so by moving away slightly from the agricultural aspect of the Gandhian philosophy.
Definitely.
And industrialize. Now, that has paid big dividends in India's space program. Because India has now entered the modern space age with the vehicle to Mars. And that has actually transformed the geopolitical structure of India, not only in Asia, but throughout the world. Now, you see, tradition dominates modernity. That is, the past dominates the present.
Okay.
And the present, unsure about its future, keeps on repeating the mistakes of the past, first time as a tragedy, and second time as a farce. India is a very, very important country, geopolitically, and its intellectual dominance will have to come to play in its role in Asia, vis-a-vis China, and Western Europe. Now, Western Europe is in chaos because of the capitalist tendency to liberty, equality, fraternity, free trade, free competition, free market, free sex, free booze, and free condoms.
Okay.
Jay.
This is the culture of the West.
Yeah, but I mean, you said that...
India has got to guard against this. Because you see, Western ideology exercised a dominant influence not only in India, but even in China, and practically throughout the whole world.
So, Jay, I have a question for you. How does India modernize without losing that?
That is one of the conundrums on the calculus of political struggle.
I thought you were going to save us all from a terrible future in India there for a moment.
I wish I knew, actually.
No,
this is a political problem.
Yeah, it is a political problem.
It is not only a political problem, it's an international, global problem. But India has got its own technique of development.
Yes.
First of all, it's got some transitional problems from the imperial past, which she has got to settle.
Yes.
It is very difficult to settle. That Pakistan is one of the problems of the legacy of imperialism. Just as Ukraine, as we know it's in the news now, Ukraine is a legacy of East-West imperialism, Russia and the West. It is very difficult to solve that.
Jay, if I can just ask you've obviously done some reading and some study of this and given it a great deal of thought, right? We're at this nexus in time, aren't we, where the Congress Party had always been presumed to be the party of modernization, and those which were traditional homespun parties like the BJP, they've always been sort of presented as being the stick in the mud that wasn't changing and was taking India backwards. Where do you see the two fitting in?
Well, the Congress Party has got the great reputation of being the party that launched India's independence struggle and has achieved that. But you see, the split between Indira Gandhi and Kamaraj for the supremacy of the Congress was a split engineered by the Western imperial powers, knowing fully well that the Congress Party, a united party, will take India forward more rapidly. So they decided to destabilize not only India by the partition of India into India and Pakistan, but the destabilization of the ruling Congress Party into Congress Indira and Congress Kamaraj.
Yes.
This is the traditional political ploy which the West does to the third world, because the third world is weak.
So do you think they've done that again with the AAP then and Congress this time?
Well, India has got to be united within a big major party like the Congress Party. You see, the BJP that came to power was a nationalist party, but it has its great drawbacks in the sense that she wants to the BJP wanted to push India forward too fast. And that brought about its collapse. The Congress party is a more pragmatic party. You see, the problems that India faces can't be solved just overnight.
Definitely not.
No, we'll take a week or two, we don't mind.
that is why India's policy of ahimsa is very, very important, because India knows that the West is very powerful. And just as it has divided India into India and Pakistan, it can go further to destabilize Indian society.
But then shouldn't India have to be strong?
Destabilized, it's very difficult to control it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with you, but I think with ahimsa in modern day, I mean, it's quite difficult. I mean, you spoke about the threat with Pakistan. If India deployed ahimsa, then how would we be able to, you know, control our borders and have a strong India with threats of invasion?
India will have to reunify itself by reintegrating the disparate part of India brought about by the legacy of imperialism.
So a modern India, I mean, we're talking about modernization and development. So how do we move from where we are to a modern India without adopting some of the Western strategies?
Well, India to a great extent has modernized politically.
Yes. Yeah.
Politically, she has a vast written constitution. Unlike this country, although it's an imperialist country, never had a constitution.
That's correct. It's uncodified.
Well, it's uncodified, but
yeah.
it hasn't got a written constitution. The reason why it hasn't got a written constitution is that the people must not know their rights, duties, and privileges.
But I think with the EU and all these different treaties, we do know our rights.
Well, you may know your rights, but
you'd be surprised.
It's not written anywhere. It's up to a gentleman's agreement. The judiciary interprets your rights, not you. The judiciary of this country interprets their rights. The legislature, which is a bourgeois legislature, passes bourgeois laws. The legislature in India is not a bourgeois legislature, it's a democratic legislature. And the battle of democracy has been won, but it will be destabilized by the West.
You know, it's a funny thing, because we've just returned from India, and I was looking from the same perspective that you're talking about, as to how far has India become modern, and how much of it has been achieved by the grassroots people themselves, and how much of it has actually been managed and guided by governments and political parties. And I was really struck by the fact that most of the population, they seem to be surging forward towards a modern India. And if anything, the political structure, the political systems, they have fallen a long way behind. And now this whole election has required them to revisit everything they've done for the last 60 years and how they've done it. And actually, a big wake-up call. And the political system, I felt, was learning to modernize itself at a much faster pace than it's ever been required to do.
Jay, thank you very much for your call. It was a pleasure having you on air. And thanks for your wonderful opinions. Thank you. Well, some interesting views there from our callers. If you'd like to call and speak to us, the number is 0208 472 9292. You can also text us on 07961 387 787. We've had some text messages come through. Sushil has texted in saying, development should be free for all. Why should we hold on to old and out-of-date traditions? So that's a bit... I mean, it's a very interesting viewpoint. Some people do think these traditions are out of date and don't really hold any kind of ground in modern day society.
Well, I think that's simplistic. There's a lady called Dr. Vandana Shiva who's doing phenomenal work on the agricultural side of things, and she has adopted some of the very old ways in which you cycle crops from field to field, and how do you optimize each year's yield.
Right.
And they've shown that using just very old ways of doing things, they've actually managed to generate much higher yields than the latest modern techniques using all of the latest pesticides.
Okay.
So it's not quite so simple as saying let's have a free-for-all for whatever anyone determines is modern and let's let it go. I think one thing has definitely happened. I think India did that for a while. And many developing countries have done that. I mean, in Africa, they opened their doors to all sorts of contributions, in inverted commas, from multinational companies.
So foreign direct investments.
That's right. And it sounds good when you say foreign direct investments, until you see somewhere like Nigeria, where oil has been taken out of Nigeria in huge quantities, and the ecologies where the sites are have been absolutely devastated.
But isn't that due to the corrupt officials that let these companies come but don't give anything back to the people? I mean, they just take a lump sum themselves and then, the actual people never get to see any of this investment.
Well, here's a question. The person who has the power, I think, also has the responsibility.
No, definitely.
And the power lies with the multinational companies in that sort of a scenario. If they wanted to, they could actually say, yes, we'll give you $10 a barrel, whatever it is more. But the requirement is that the ecology must be maintained, that the local indigenous population, they must be looked after, not just shunted to one side. That could be the approach. The power resides with the large outside external forces. Maybe that's a utopian point of view.
I think so, because,
right?
there's always responsibility to shareholders. To make a certain profit, which generally seems to trump any other social, ecological responsibility.
Well, the good thing now is lots of these companies have been getting a lot of stick and bad publicity. Like Nestle in Africa, what they're doing with milk for babies. A lot of that's been coming out now, and also Primark. So we have been hearing things, and they have been named and shamed, which is good. So hopefully companies should be taking more responsibility.
Sure. And the traditional example for abuse of third world resources, Monsanto, that's always been touted, and they've also been taking a lot of bad press. They're being banned in many South American countries now, and I think this is part of the third world waking up to the fact that a free-for-all didn't really work for them, that they opened their borders, they opened their resources, and weren't quite treated, shall we say, in the manner in which they thought they would be.
But just going back to Sushil's text message about out-of-date traditions, there are some traditions which could be seen as very out-of-date in India, such as, arranged marriages, dowry system. They're cultural traditions, so it's not necessarily religious, but it's something that can be seen to be out of date. Why do people still do it? Especially dowry.
Well, dowry, we touched on dowry a while ago, but there are similar traditions like this which they were created at a time in response to a need. With dowry, you've mentioned it, but originally the way in which a dowry worked was that a woman would have her own independent wealth in the family that she joined. So the family that she joined wasn't given that money. It was given to secure the new bride's position in that family, so that she didn't start with absolutely nothing in an established structure. She had her own asset base, she had her own way of generating an income, and it put her onto an equal footing with people who were already there. And you can see that from that point of view, it would make really good sense.
So the dowry was given to the girl?
Correct. It was
Not
part
to
of
her.
her. Absolutely. It was part of her.
Sounds like a pretty good idea, even now, if it was to be done still,
Yeah, I came across a really lovely movie not so long ago called The Quiet Man, John Wayne, and it's set in Ireland.
Right.
And they had it's set sort of 40, 50 years ago, and they had exactly the same system, where the young lady in question is insisting that her father give her X number of pounds, which she had saved, and that she'd earned from all of this, plus a share of the... She wanted the dining room table. It was such a lovely dining room table. She said, it's mine, it's part of my dowry, etc. And so she wanted all of that to be her possessions that she took into her new relationship. Now there you can see how it would give security. And I think with many of these traditions, if you actually take the trouble to dig back into the context and the time, then there was a different value. But like most things go up and things go down, and many of these have been corrupted beyond recognition.
It sounds like it. It sounds awful.
But I think Prerna's point is a valid one. Sometimes the context changes and the need for certain things also changes and diminishes. Because other things have cropped up and taken its place.
Yeah, it's evolution, isn't it? And absolutely, this is part of development. In a world now where men and women both work.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
There is a totally different dynamic now. And so, absolutely right. What's the need for a dowry-based, transaction-based relationship?
Definitely. There's also traditions as well where, the groom pays for some part of the wedding and the female has to pay for the rest of it. So
I think she should pay for all of it.
No, I don't think that's right. I think it should be, split equally. Why should, women have to pay for everything?
I'm planning to demand a dowry for my parents to give me money.
Okay. Well, we've got a text in from Anita, who, similar to Sushil, says that every country have their own traditions which they are proud of. Isn't it about time that new traditions were adopted and the old ones torn up?
Is there such a thing as a new tradition? I'd called me an old-fashioned sort of bloke, but I thought a tradition was something that was old.
Well, I think traditions, there was a time where they originated, so for them to have originated, they were new. And then throughout time, they became old traditions. So.
I don't think there's anything wrong in new ways of doing things. Yep. But often things are discarded without really understanding what was behind them. And then you lose what is a huge history, a really colourful, incredible history. Of all of the nations and the traditions I've come across, I have to say the Indian tradition is the way in which you live the most exuberant, extraordinarily colourful, sort of wonderfully ebullient way of doing everything. We've just come from a wedding, okay, and everybody has a little role to play in there, and everyone is involved in doing excess. It's all about excess, you know. Even when the bride, the groom gets up onto his horse, there's a line of young ladies who are saying, well, it's my right to put surma into the groom's eyes. And so they're lined up wanting to do that, and
the poor guy must be so traumatized.
Black eyes after that.
Oh yeah. And so there are lots of traditions which are just there to help everyone participate, and it just makes everything larger than life, because you can have a black and white mundane register wedding if you wish as well, but you can involve all these people in all these traditions, and it just makes the feel of the whole thing totally different.
So I think as long as these traditions are understood, right, and then if necessary modernized, then I don't think there's any problem with them. But I think the understanding bit is important, and that's the bit that most people tend to miss out.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's anything wrong in new traditions that add to the colour and the joy of any occasional event. And equally, there's no reason to discard something that can add to the joy and colour of an event.
Definitely. I mean, if they're not seen as joyous, then maybe get rid of them. I say. Well, anyway, keep your text coming in on 07961 387 787. You can also call us. We've got 10 more minutes left. The number is 808 472 9292.
Okay, wonderful. One thing that we talked about whilst the adverts were on was some of the... It's a moving forward. We touched on this word progress, right?
Yeah.
We've all talked about material progress and infrastructure and gross domestic product and things like that, right? But there is progress being made in the West on spiritual understanding. And so they are moving forward towards a healthier understanding of their own spirit. But in the East, that's always been very, very much a part of the worldview, hasn't it? So does modernization also, can we sort of look at it as a mirror, that the West is modernizing in that it's improving its understanding of how the mind works, of how spirit works, of holistic health? So it's modernizing in that point of view, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's true. That makes a lot of sense.
Would you
It's a
say
very
that?
interesting idea, yeah. So what, in, say, a couple of 100 years, we'd all be the same?
And then we'll just start again.
Yeah, we just rebalance, you know, would be a bit more developed physically like the West, and the West would be a bit more spiritually similar to the
it's
East.
true. I mean, there's definitely like an exchange between cultures. I mean, the West are becoming more Eastern and the East a bit more Western.
So from the Eastern perspective, we look at the West and we think the first world is modernizing in terms of becoming spiritually aware, whilst the third world is modernizing and becoming
Less
perhaps materially more aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just got a text in from Rita who raised a point that we spoke about dowry. Dowry is still wrong, even if it is to establish herself in a new home. Isn't it just enough that a girl leaves everything to live with a strange family for the rest of her life?
Well, we're just saying she doesn't need to leave everything.
She can take something. She can take some things with her.
Take a fridge.
Dining room table.
But I guess, I mean, with the system of dowry, I mean, even though it started off with good intentions, it has been kind of manipulated and abused.
Yeah, it has.
I think everything can be manipulated. It's the nature of people, isn't it, really?
There are good people and there are bad people. And there is another thing that happens, and that is that one generation accumulates assets, right?
Yeah.
And they want somehow or other to give them on to the next generation. So we have traditions where at any event you always end up giving young girls money. Right, in India, Sagan, we will take out Sagan at this wonderful wedding that I was at very recently. I was with the groom's family after the wedding, and the new bride, she came and insisted on making a dish for me. And it was the first time that she'd cooked anything for all of us, and she made this lovely dish, gave it to us. And there's a tradition that when she gives you, the first meal that she gives you, you have to give a sagan and a blessing. And so there's a transfer of assets as well, tied to so many little events. And so from that point of view, maybe a marriage is also a great time to shift assets from the old established families to give the new established family some sort of stability. I think the problem is when it's demanded, when it has no respect for the person who's joining the family, nor for the girl's family as well. If it's demanded and it's unpleasant,
it's
then
the feeling, isn't it? It's
wrong.
the feeling that's
it feels unjust. I mean, why should someone demand something from you?
Well, it's extortion.
Yeah.
It is extortion, sort of. Right, we've got your daughter-in-law, we've got your daughter hostage now, and here's the bill for protection services. Isn't that what it?
No, it does seem like that at all.
Like.
I mean, and that's why you get all these sort of dowry-related accidents. I mean, if a daughter-in-law doesn't come with the right amount of dowry, something often terrible happens to her, and it's just such a shame. We've just got a text in from Ali in Barking. He said, with modernisation, people live in excess. The rich are dripping with designer goods while people nearby have nothing to eat. I think that's what we're talking about with the trickle-down effect, that you get one side of the population who are so rich that they can afford all these kind of lavish and exuberant goods while people nearby can't even, afford food.
I think, Ali, thank you for that. I think that is absolutely spot on. I think this is where modernisation gone wrong becomes visible. Modernisation gone wrong, just ending in sensory stimulation and excess of everything, is a retrograde step, isn't it? It takes everyone back to a great deal of suffering, a great deal of poverty for many as well. Yeah. So I totally agree. Modernisation in that sense is not what we're really...
I agree with Ali's point, but I think there's an underlying question here. One of the first definitions of modernisation we had texted in was the eradication of poverty. Is that ever possible, do you think? I mean, in a society where everyone... Okay, assume an ideal society where everyone's basically, gets what they deserve, right? So they work really hard. People who work really hard get the fruits of their labour, and those who don't get as much.
Yeah.
There will always be some people with more than others.
I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem, and this is relevant to what Ali was saying, the problem arises when people have an unfair advantage and an ability to prevent others from getting the results that their efforts should actually give to them.
Right, so people on the extremes
Yeah.
who are unfairly there.
That's right, the people who maintain a position on the basis of some sort of power that they've acquired in the past, and they're intent on increasing that power base at the expense of anyone else. Modernisation, if you view it from the point of view of designer goods, of how many new billionaires do we have, how many of them own really wonderful yachts, etc., etc., that's not modernisation. I think the key determinant about improving everybody's level of happiness, everyone's level of affluence, those are the key aspects, I would say.
And maybe these people that do have designer goods or, have a lot of wealth, they are giving to charity and they are, doing things behind closed doors that people don't necessarily know about. So we never know really what's going on. But I guess it's just when you see it, it just feels bad.
I think we would know. I think if that was going on sufficiently as to make a difference, right, we would know. There would not be nearly as many homeless. There would not be nearly as many temples giving food in food banks and gurdwara giving so much food, etc. All of that would have disappeared to a larger extent, I think.
I was reading an article on the internet where they said something about, Facebook's just recently bought out WhatsApp, and the amount of money that was paid for that, if a fraction of that money had been spent, you could have solved clean water, the problem of clean water in several African countries.
Without a doubt.
Easily.
We had a text in last week as well, which is gave us some figures of what it'd be like to eradicate poverty and the amount of money that's spent on wars. And, it's just amazing. So much money is spent on wars, where if we just use it, a fraction of that, we'd be able to eradicate world poverty.
Yeah, so I think Ali's point is definitely supported by research and by studies.
Yeah, our text line's gone a bit crazy with the whole dowry comment. Rajesh Singh from Ilford said, women and their families are seen as a weaker party, and individuals or the religious leaders have basically made a tradition to take money and goods from this. It should be banned and be made into a criminal offence. That's Rajesh Singh from Ilford. Thank you very much for your text message, Rajesh.
I think it already has, hasn't it? Yeah, thanks for that, Rajesh. I think
in India it has been made
already
legal.
has been banned. But even then, there are still people who are demanding it, and there are still people who are paying it. It'll take time, I feel, for it to disappear. We come from I come from a village environment, and the last time this happened in our village, the groom and his party who had made demands, they were invited to come to the wedding. They arrived at the wedding, and the groom was seized by the villagers, tied to a tree, and thoroughly humiliated. The whole barat was given a damn good thrashing.
Village justice.
I know.
I think village justice isn't going to be the only solution to this particular one.
No, it's true. I think that sort of stuff where it's demanded should definitely be stamped out. And I think sometimes you can leave it to the people to sort out, like in this case.
Yeah, I think, but mostly people are
turning. The tide is turning.
I think so. If people stop giving money, then slowly it would stop happening.
I think there's one wonderful aspect to it, and that is that if somebody were to demand a dowry that early on in the relationship, right, I would say thank God for that, right? Thank God for the demand. Yeah. Because what more of a red flag do you want on a future relationship? I would say thank you so much for letting me know what you're like, and then tying the groom to a tree and giving a good friend.
So thank you, but no thank you. I'm good.
Okay, so the texts are flooding in now.
Yeah, we've got another text from Ashok, which was related to what we were talking about, designer goods. He said, modernisation actually makes us more greedy. Modernisation equals capitalism. So the kind of, paper-based, money-based driven society that I want these goods, I want this car.
I think that Ashok has hit absolutely on a fact, and that is that the capitalist system is the one that's marketing modernisation. They're the guys who are pushing the modernisation agenda very strongly and have been for quite some time, and that is not necessarily a completely honest agenda. So yeah, I totally agree with some parts of that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. There's this, idea that you need to be a democracy to be a modernised nation. You need to be a capitalist democracy to do this. I don't think that's always true.
It isn't.
I remember reading about South Korea, and South Korea, before it liberalised politically, it developed so fast, and then liberalised politically afterwards. And I think, for some countries it's actually possible to develop and modernise faster if you're not a democracy.
I remember.
I know it's quite...
it happened in Russia, it happened with the Soviet Union. They managed to industrialise very quickly without being a democracy under Stalin. I know that was a kind of extremist
that's right.
sense, but that's what happened.
I remember coming across a paper a long, long time ago where it had established that the idea would be a benign dictatorship, if there is such a thing. But,
that's what I said at university, and it wasn't received particularly well.
I can imagine.
Okay. Have we just had another text come in? I just heard that go bleep, and I think we're almost out of time as well.
Yeah, no, I think we are out of time. So thank you to all of you that texted in, that called in. We just sum up, modernisation, it does have lots of benefits, but it also depends on the country itself and its leaders who want to take, modernisation forward whilst sticking to their roots.
I think so. Get rid of poverty, but hang on to your traditions.
Yeah, and also happiness as well. If your country's happy, then you can be called a modern society. I think that's a very nice notion.
And beat up anyone who demands a dowry.
Yeah, tie them to a tree. Well, do stay tuned next week. Same place, same time. We'll be joined with Jay Siddiqui, and we'll be talking about religious schools.